Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir. I represent an organization known as Africa Rising. Today, I would like to share my story with you. I was born in 1982, during the time when apartheid was still at the forefront of government of South Africa. A system so brutal, in fact, that if the system were to catch a child that was born from a mixed-race couple, they would remove that child from both parents and put them in an area with only mixed-race people. I was very lucky to have grown up with my grandmother, and I met my grandfather for the first time in 1990, just before he came out of prison. And of course, as an 8-year-old, I had the typical image of what prison was like. Concrete bars, steel, and guards everywhere. But when I got there, it was nothing like what I had imagined. It was a beautiful house, a house much more beautiful than the one I lived in. It had a swimming pool. I never had a swimming pool. It had a VCR at the time. I didn't have a VCR. It had a chef who ate amazing food, even watched The Never-Ending Story. And we met our grandfather, and it was amazing. And that was the first time I had an idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told myself, when I grow up, I want to go to jail. And in 1993, after having lived in Soweto, I moved in with my grandfather. He sent his driver to come and fetch me. And of course, I was at home alone. He came at about 2, 3 in the afternoon. My parents only get home at about 6 p.m. And so he came and he told me that I've been sent by a grandfather to come and fetch you. And I said, I'm sorry, I cannot go with you. My parents are not home. There were no cell phones, as you can imagine, back in '93. Well, for me, anyway. And so I told the man that I couldn't go with him, and he just couldn't believe it. Do you have any idea who your grandfather is? Are you stupid? Do you want me to get fired? And I said, I'm sorry, sir, I cannot go with you. And after a while, the man gave up, and he left. And so later that evening, when my father arrived, I told him what had happened. And he said, okay, if the man comes back again, go with him. And funny enough, the man came back that same week, and I jumped into the car and I went with him. And I moved in with my grandfather that week, and he told me that he would send my parents to university. And my father went to university for the first time at the age of 45, and he became a lawyer at the age of 50. He never grew up with the father. He was on the streets to fend for himself. But I, on the other hand, moved in with my grandfather when I was 11 years old. And life changed for the better, of course. And all those years with my grandfather, we never really spoke much. It was only about discipline and making sure I have everything needed for school, and the occasional scolding when my room was untidy, or that kind of thing. Fast forwarding a little bit, in 2010, I had traveled a little bit with my grandfather and were able to meet people from different backgrounds. I remember going to America for the first time in 2001, and of course, we went to Disney World. And we're in the queue to go into the roller coaster, and eventually we get to the front of the roller coaster, and you get into a conversation. Hi, how are you? Oh, so where are you from? Oh, no, I'm from South Africa. And the gentleman asked me, how big do the lions get in South Africa? And I look at my cousin in awe, and I'm like, hey, shit. I'm sorry, sir, I have no idea how big lions get. I don't work at the zoo. I'm not a game ranger, so I'm sorry, I can't tell you how big lions get. And I traveled to London, traveled to France, And I realized that people have very limited knowledge when it comes to Africa. And the little knowledge that they have is always the negative perception that are perpetuated in the media, that Africa is a place of war, poverty, disease, and dictators. I will not tell you much about Africa, but I'll ask you to simply go and watch one of the best TED Talks that I've ever personally seen by my sister, Malance. And she will break down Africa in that TED Talk like you couldn't believe. And she's actually here with us today. Thank you for coming, my sister. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2013, my mother died of HIV/AIDS. In 2015, my father died of HIV/AIDS. And so we sat in a room at home to discuss amongst the family as to what we would tell the world how my father died. And one of my cousins said, well, HIV/AIDS doesn't kill you. It kills your immune system so that you can't defend yourself against common disease like pneumonia and TB and even cold. So we can say that. And my grandfather said, no, we shall not do that. We shall simply tell the world that my son died of HIV/AIDS. And that's exactly what we did. We went out there, stood united as a family, and my grandfather read out the statement. And it was the first time that in South Africa, a prominent family had actually confessed and told the world the truth about the cause of death of one of our own family members. And it was a really breaking moment in the fight against HIV/AIDS in our country. Because before that, nobody had really disclosed what was happening. And so, you see, what is happening is that the biggest thing that we're fighting is the stigma against HIV/AIDS. People not being able to disclose their status simply because they are afraid of how they're going to be treated. Simply because they're afraid that they're going to be discriminated against simply because of their sexual orientation or because they have this disease, not understanding that it works like any other disease out there in the world. And so, a few years ago, I was very lucky to have joined United Nations AIDS, and I became their global ambassador. And we went to Brazil, to the favelas, and spoke with orphanages, and spoke with sex workers, encouraging them to keep the fight against HIV/AIDS and to break the silence against this epidemic. We're very lucky today to have been blessed with the presence of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Through the advancement of modern technology and medicine, they have been able to create such amazing medicine that our people can now consume and live their full life expectancy. Not just HIV/AIDS, but malaria, TB, and so on. So it's people like this who are able to dedicate themselves further than their everyday orientation that allows people on our continent to get the confidence to be able to fight against such epidemics. Now, we are here in France today, a beautiful country, and I walk through the streets of France, and I see amazing gold statues on top of buildings and gold roofs, and I'm amazed. I'm in awe. And I ask myself, but I don't remember France having a gold mine. Where's all this gold coming from? Hey, then I do a little bit of research, and I see that this gold is actually coming from my continent of Africa, from Mali, to be exact. And I say, wow. You know, I look at Mali, and I look at the poverty that exists, and I look at Paris, and I don't see any poverty at all. I'm sure it does exist because we're living in this kind of world after all. And then you ask yourself, why do so many people risk their lives? Risk their lives to go on a tiny little raft, paddle themselves across the Mediterranean Ocean to come to France? Because they're looking for better opportunities, because those opportunities do not exist where they live. So what am I to say to you today? Am I supposed to say, give the gold back? Am I supposed to say, what am I supposed to say? Leave my people alone? Let my people go? No. I'm not going to ask you to let my people go. I'm going to say, let my people live. I'm going to say, let my people live. And how do we let our people live? You allow them to build the very same country that you have built here in France. And you can support them in building universities, in building businesses, in building plants and processing plants, and all kinds of infrastructure. Because then you will not have the situation of people risking their lives, their children's lives, to come and look for better opportunity, because they will have it there at home. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, we live in one world, and it is all interconnected. But we need to make sure that we understand how we are treating each other. We want to see a more prosperous world. We want to close the gap that exists between rich and the poor people. We don't want to deal with terrorism. Terrorism everywhere. So, what do I say to you? I say, ladies and gentlemen, it is up to us to get together and make sure that we take control of our own destiny and not leave it in the hands of dictators that exist. So I'm asking you now to please stand up with me. Please stand up with me. Put your hands up right here and repeat after me. It is in our hands. It is in our hands to change the world. Together, we can achieve everything. Thank you.